Hi everyone, welcome back to the show. In this episode, we are joined by Nick Stewart, who is a sleep and holistic energy coach, as we discuss what Sleep Knowledge 2.0 is, what sleep fitness is, what to do after a bad night's sleep, and so much more. Before that though, this episode is brought to you by Riverside. Riverside is an online studio platform designed to record, edit, and share high quality podcasts built for growth from day one. Powered by AI, you can record in 4K video or from your phone and automatically remove filler words such as ums, as, you knows, and many other speech patterns. Built for human conversations, Riverside is the perfect platform to start your podcast, built for growth from day one. Ready to start your podcast? Check out the link in the show note description to learn more about Riverside and get a 15%, yes, that's a 15% discount off a paid subscription. Now let's dive into my conversation today with Nick Stewart and discuss the very important topic of sleep. Nick, welcome to Raising Consciousness today. How are you doing?
Good. I've had a very smooth morning. I've been on like a 2 to 3 day rest and restore time, so I'm more calm and chill than I normally am in the wild world of solo entrepreneurship. So this is kind of a good time.
I think, especially all of us creators and one-man bands definitely need some of your calming and energy. I know I do, busy time and everything. So
Yeah.
it's great that you've been able to detach a little bit, which isn't always often the case, I find. But thank you for joining me today. My first question that I tend to always ask my guests is, who are you and what do you do?
Sure. Yeah, I'll give the sort of standard answer that typically people want to hear. It's not the one I want to tell, but it is the truth. So my name is Nick Stewart. I am a professional sleep and energy coach and author of a book this past year called Sleep Fitness that I'll bring up and get into because it ties into some of what we plan to talk about. And I've been at it for a little while, and really sort of the jump off event, sort of like what propelled you to do this event was in 2018. I had some bad and inefficient medical care, and I didn't sleep for 17 days. And then proceeded to have what in Western medical definition is insomnia for 2.5 years, with really no to little progress, whether that was seeing traditional counselors or therapists or psychiatrists or general medical doctors, a couple visits to the hospital. And, I eventually had this sort of like epiphany moment in my living room surrounded, and I just was so alone. And I realized it's been 2.5 years and there's been no progress. No one is coming to save me. And so it's like I don't know where I found the energy, frankly. I think it's spiritual energy, because at that point I had no physical energy. I had very little emotional energy, and my mental cognitive energy was probably as weak as it could be. And I just turned around, and I have a background, a master's in business, which focused on research, and did some time with a PhD program doing more research. So I just was like, fine, then I'll double down and do the research myself. And over time, sort of buried myself in a living room filled with research papers, publications, magazines, every book from Amazon. And then this part of the story doesn't usually get told, but I'll share it here. I can't remember how much longer I went from there, but it was a good long while. And I had another one of those moments where I'm sitting there in the living room and it looks like a picture of, like, I don't know, some brainiac, with like written scribble theories and, books all over the place. And I realized I know more than probably a doctor does about sleep, and I'm still an insomniac. And so one of the big lessons I learned, and I shared on one of the last shows I was on, was that your knowledge of sleep has no translation into your experience of sleep. They do not connect. Like some of my first clients would be like, Nick, yeah, like, so like, I know like stage one is like is light sleep, and then you transition into like slow wave deep sleep, and they want to tell me about the stages and all these things, and and I know that this is really good for it, and blah blah blah. And I'd be like, I listen, and be like, that's cool, that's cool. So how are you sleeping? I'm not sleeping well. It's really bad. It's like, okay, so all of the knowledge you have about sleep has essentially been useless. And so I kind of came to that spot and realized I need to pivot. And so I pivot and stopped all research on sleep and rest and restoration and went to change, theories on change models, theories on anything that had to do with that. And I did develop a little change model after that period of time. But when I started to broaden the scope and sort of intuitively work on myself as a test subject and then have other people be like, hey, could you help me with this? I know you're good at this. It was then over time that I realized, oh, at first I thought I was magical because I was like, wow, I have this insane, like unheard of track record of success. Like I must be magical. And then, had the client that from hell that like wakes you up and realizes, no, you're not magical. And so I had to kind of reassess and realize the client has to do the work. But the model that I use to evaluate somebody and then begin what I would say that I'm a professional plan maker in a way. And so I used a 4,000-year-old model that we can get into in a little bit to do that. And I now realize that that's why the question when people work with me isn't like, is this going to work? The question is, for Luke, what's Luke's invisible little clock inside that says if he does this continuously for more than 4 to 6 weeks, when is Luke's clock turn and it's over? Whatever his issue was. I wake up every 3 hours. I can't fall asleep. Whatever the issue is, that I can never predict. But I can predict based on using these ancient models that the probability of this working is near 100%. That also goes with a recent edition of using Lao Tzu's, one of his famous quotes from 2,500 years ago to really almost up the insurance of the plan another level that we can talk about that's awesome. So yeah, I guess people started calling me a holistic sleep and energy coach. People usually want to talk to me about sleep because it's like a epidemic problem for people. But, like I'm working with a CEO right now and pretty quick he understood we're going to get me back to sleep balance in like 4 weeks. But the program runs another 2 to 4. So I was like, well, great. Now we can go to the energy part and start equipping you as a CEO with the technical skills and capacities that will keep you on an edge in your industry. So that's when things get really fun for me.
Amazing, man. So why does the work that you do matter? Like, why should somebody who's pressed play, or if they're watching this on YouTube or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, etc., why should they care about the topics that we're going to talk about today, all around sleep, and why that's important, why your work matters?
Yeah, I think 2 reasons. One is that the problems that we face to our daily energy and to our sleep due to the way we've organized as a capitalistic model globally, the way technology is evolving, and then the blow up of artificial intelligence, you're always going to be facing a problem with these two things. This is not going away in 2025, 2026. So it's a problem everyone's going to face to different degrees based on their lives and the way they live it. So number one, I would say it matters because we're living in a time when we have 3 compressing factors that just aren't going away. They're going to be here and they're going to stay. And then the second, in terms of me, I didn't realize this when I was doing that developmental work, but as some of the reviews of the book are coming back, and we're going to do a re-release of the book shortly, there's some dramatic jump off differences between me and conventional sort of sleep medicine, if you will. So in their case, I think one of the biggest things that jumped out at, if you look at the reviews of the book, is almost everyone who reviewed it or reviewed like a comment or something was that I pitched a program that's custom, and that basically all of the previous traditions, even every book that you can get on an Amazon bookshelf, is really like, okay, Luke, here's some information about sleep. You're in box A. We have a little line. You're going to do these three things, and then you'll go to box B, and then you'll go to box C. And it's this very one size fits all model. And I make the argument in the book fairly quickly, and I've done it on videos and stuff. Is As one guy, his podcast reviewer, says, he's like, "Yeah, this is not your typical book on sleep." By chapter 2, he dismantles the long-going one-size-fits-all convention. So what I find is that a lot of people respond to that. That they're like, "Oh my God, like, thank you." Like, yeah, like my sleep problem is nothing like my husband's, or, my friend who passed away who kind of motivated this particular book. He died of complications of something called sleep apnea, where you don't get full oxygen in your breathing at night. That's totally different than, I'd say, I don't know, 55% of people I talk to, where it's like, I'm really anxious at night. I have ruminating thoughts at night. Those require two totally different setups and approaches, and like they couldn't be more different. Thinking of the other guy I'm working with right now he's a business architectural analyst. I'm not sure what that is, but that's what he does. And he was just fatiguing out. Basically, he had sleep deprivation and burnout. He just didn't know what to call it. And so we started in a place that was very different than the guy that I worked with before. Now, some of the methods and some of those evaluation processes that I talked about that are literally thousands of years old, I use the same ones. And often the tactics and the hacks and the tricks and the sequences, those are often the same. But it's sort of a question of when and where do we use them? How much of them matter to this person? So that's to answer the question.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, I think it's the same with whatever area of our health, like we kind of look at, so whether it's sleep, whether it's nutrition, whether it's exercise, there is kind of like this one size fits all paradigm kind of like within the mainstream that people want to kind of push on everyone, where, the more I'm kind of exploring health, one, I'm seeing health and my approach to health is very much holistic. It's obviously discovering your work why I wanted to have you on. And then two, it's personalized, right? So like discovering more about personalized nutrition, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and I think that's something that most people is kind of new to them, but it's something that it's new to them in terms of maybe they haven't heard it before, because like most of the standard resources is like that one size fits all approach that you spoke about there, but it's something that they crave, And so, yeah, it's, because like we're all different in different ways, right? And so I
Yeah.
feel like whatever area of health kind of we're looking at, including sleep, to have that personalized approach, discovering your work to, and come on to kind of the ancient kind of practices that you use. Maybe it kind of interlinks in terms of the question that I'm about to ask. Two things stood out, and you're actually wearing the cap. So sleep fitness and sleep knowledge 2.0. So what can you define what sleep fitness actually is, and can you define sleep knowledge 2.0?
Yeah.
And
Let
then,
me
yeah,
make a
of
note
course,
about that.
we'd love to dive into the ancient wisdom that kind of I don't know, maybe both kind of are resided within, but yeah, was really curious to define those for the listeners and audience.
Yeah, let's do that. Before we jump on that, is I wanted to add to your eloquent point about the shifting of more personalized care. Is my final sense is that people are sick of being treated as, okay, come into the doctor's office, okay, great, you answer these questions, now get out 20 minutes later. That there is definitely I don't think we can quantify it yet, but I would say there's an invisible urge from humans across the globe. Like, I work with people from Bangladesh, India, the UK, Australia, Canada, and the United States. And they all kind of have that same inner call to be treated as a person holistically, and not just as another theoretical box in a well-designed theory that came up at Princeton. And the last thing I'd say, just to give people just an idea of how extreme the personalization can be. Well, one of my clients, it was pretty clear that if I was going to take him on, he was going to be living on less than necessary sleep. So we had to sort of identify the 4 quadrants of energy and figure out, how do we amp them? Well, there was one that I was like, oh, great, I get to use this with this one guy. I've never been able to use this like hack before, and people have never heard of it. And it's singing. So if you look up the research benefits of singing, there's like, I don't know, 6 or 7. And so the reason why I introduced it to him early was because we needed to boost his energy in the other 3 quadrants so that we could compensate for the lack of sleep. He also has a newborn baby. So I was like, do you sing to your baby? He's like, no, I can't sing. And I was like, all right. And so then again, we work together. It's one of the things I love about my work is like, it's collaborative. There's a certain point where I lead and train, but there's also these open spaces of like, tell me about your life. Like, what's going on? Like, what would you like? What would make sense for you? And so we figured out, oh, okay, he spends 10 minutes in the car twice a day with the baby in the back seat, and they're doing nothing. No one can hear them. And he was like, I have a terrible voice. I'm like, well, perfect. No one's going to be able to hear you. And so I did a training for him and sent it to him through a Loom video and broke it down. But I also looked up what are the top 5 Indian pop child friendly songs. And I was like, dude, put these on. Don't worry about if you know the lyrics or not. And just start singing while you're doing these drives with your baby. So people are sometimes shocked with some of the things that we do in these plans because they're like, oh, I thought it'd be so much less fun or easy. And it's like, no, most of this stuff isn't that hard. You just have to be timely about it and know what to do. So by the time I had checked in with him to actually officially give him that assignment, he had already started doing it and was like, I'm having such a blast. It's so much fun. My baby's like laughing and he's like making noises, and like it did everything I wanted it to do. It's an awesome technique for folks who are watching. If you're ever in an emotionally like, I can't get rid of this bad feeling. It's like you're stuck. I'll give you an example. Like a few weeks back, I was like, okay, time to start today. Got to hit those like key, projects. Technical problem. Hour goes by. Okay, let's move on to the second one. IT problem. Another hour. So it was like 3.5 hours of just IT problems. I don't get shaken a lot. I was so frustrated, Luke, and like, but by the time I met a family member for lunch, I still couldn't shake it, and I was like, "I'm sorry, I don't mean to come across like irritable, but I'm just like I can't shake this." And so I got back to my office. I was like, "What can I do?" I was like, "I could sing myself to death." And so I put on my favorite songs, put on like the side of my headphone, and I just started singing. One thing that people will be amazed if you try this is that you don't know the lyrics to some of your favorite songs. I was like, I've been listening to this song since I was a little kid. This is like maybe my favorite song of all time. I clearly am having trouble with the lyrics, but it doesn't matter. About 15 or 20 minutes later, I was still doing it and I was working while I was doing it. And I checked the clock and I was like, I've been doing this for like 30 minutes. And then I realized, Luke, whoa, I am, I think emotion we feel like in our stomachs and our bodies a lot. I felt totally free. I didn't feel irritated at all. And the funny thing was, I still hadn't done anything to do with those first 3 major projects. It overrode that as being like, well, you can't feel good until you have done these things. Just the power of expression that singing out loud will do is so effective, it will move you through emotions. And my last plug for singing out loud is for guys. There's if you're a guy out there and you're like, I'm a stuffed up, guy who doesn't want to go to therapy and, I don't want to talk about my issues. Dr. Ed, his last name is literally Rainbow. He's on LinkedIn. He is probably one of the top 3 thinkers in male psychology in the world. And so we've had this discussion before, just like, he did an incredible breakdown about how, again, current models in this situation of psychotherapy or therapy, I had never seen someone do this. He broke down why each element of it is a repulsive experience for men who are more male dominated in their being raised or in their culture. So I find the singing is something that is really great for men because one of the things it does is you're expressing emotions that you can't articulate in a session with a psychologist. You don't know what it is, but who cares? Like you're moving stuff through your body. So anyways, that's my last plug. So sleep fitness. Yeah, so sleep fitness. It's a couple things. It sort of represents a few things. One, it represents my effort to coin a term that we could use to unify a very segregated community. Like, if you look at the physical fitness community of people like me who are physical trainers, a lot of them have relationships with academic institutions and they're running different experiments and they're mutually beneficial. The academics get to publish and that's how they save their job. The trainer gets to realize, oh, actually, if we change his routine from every 3 days to every 2 days and we do it on this day and this day, he's going to have an X percentage increase in muscle mass. So that relationship is really strong. And it also, Luke, it came from a similar place that I don't really understand why it's not happening for sleep, which is doctors got overran by people with massive overstorages of fat. I mean, they were just out of shape. They had major, major weight gain problems. And doctors were like, we can't handle this amount of people who are this sick. And so, boom, this entire industry, very unified, popped up with gyms, physical fitness trainers, nutritionalists, books on all these topics, research on all these topics, conferences, the works. There was a whole thing that just unified around physical fitness. So to me, it seemed like a no-brainer that sleep fitness could be a term that could unify someone who was a doctor talking to a client and would say, well, like, dude, your sleep fitness really needs a boost here and there because, this is going on and this is going on, this is going on. So my original impetus was to provide some kind of term that could be unifying that we could then someday look at the physical fitness world and go, oh, they're like a mirror image of each other. They have so many of the similar things. Like under the hood, they're different, but on top, in terms of how we connect each other, we're all doing this one thing. So that's the first reason why it exists. And then the second is sort of become like my, pending trademark term for my model for training. So sleep fitness is I've just started to carve out kind of what that would look like for me to train another coach on how to use the model. It will probably likely be fall under this term of sleep fitness. So from that standpoint, it's just a description of sort of the fundamental aspect of my training.
What about sleep knowledge 2.0? I found that to be
Yeah, no. Yeah, I had forgot we were going to talk about that, so I'm not as ready to hit you with all of them, but I'll give you a couple. So for those
Yeah,
of
I
you,
mean, I mean, like to define it, so like if people are looking through your work, obviously they can see the cat with sleep fitness, and so yeah, and then obviously when I was looking for your work, it said sleep knowledge 2.0, and I was like, actually, what does that mean for your average person walking down the street, if that makes
yeah,
sense?
yeah, I'll give you the general answer and then give you a couple specifics, and then just say that it's actually a working either video log or some kind of content's going to come out of it. But basically, the idea is that the average person is like, yeah, I know about sleep. Like, I'm fine. I get it. And then they'll spout out like a few things. You're supposed to get, I don't know, 8 hours of sleep. And yeah, it's not good to work night shifts all the time because you get cancer earlier or something. So much has been updated and changed in terms of the nuances of sleep knowledge that I know when someone tells me something that they're living in what I would call the old sleep world. An example would be, some people would be like, the more sleep you get, the better, right? This is like an old idea of sleep. So as much sleep as you can get, the better. Sleep Knowledge 2.0 has already answered this question. It's just not been disseminated very well. I actually happen to have found it in a sleep journal that I was throwing away. As I was skimming through, I looked for any studies that have huge sample sizes. And one of the studies, by accident, revealed an answer that everyone has asked the question still to this day. How much sleep do you need? Actually, there is a objective answer. This study of over 400,000 people internationally, it came back. The minimum amount is 4 hours. It's not a great way to live your life. It doesn't feel good, but it will keep you going. The maximum was 8. And the closer you got to 10, it wasn't a causality, meaning this caused it, but the data regression analysis that came back would find things that were related. And one of the things it found was the longer you stay in bed after 8 hours, the increased chances that you will end up with depression are in lockstep together. So it's actually kind of dangerous psychologically to sleep more than 8 hours on a regular basis. So that can be very eye-opening for people. It's like, what? The second thing, in terms of like little examples, and this is something in the book that I usually send people this free chapter, and I think it's sort of representative of Sleep Knowledge 2.0, is I'll have a lot of people who, I'm trying to think of what I even titled the chapter because I talk about it so much with clients, is in the old days, right? Okay, so yeah, chapter 3, the body is designed to stay awake. So this is a rather shocking statement for most people. And I usually introduce it with people who are having nighttime anxiety. And it usually runs like this, Luke. Yeah, I'm in bed. I look at the clock, it's 2. I start getting upset because I'm like, I'm not falling asleep yet. Then another hour and a half goes by, and now I'm starting to freak out and I'm panicked. And then I realize, oh my God, it's an hour and I have to get up and start getting ready to go to work. I'm not going to be able to do this. Like, there's something wrong with me. And I think that's the conclusion a lot of people come to in those situations is there is something wrong, and then there's something wrong with me. There's nothing wrong with you. In fact, we can either look at it in the book, we can look at it from a biblical standpoint, if that's your sort of traditional way of explaining the world, is that God designed you to be able to stay up for days. You can look at it from an ancient anthropological sort of history evolution, where very real, usually men, groups of men would stay up and have what we would have called the first ever night shifts to guard the tribe, to guard the fire, to keep it from animals, to keep it from other tribes attacking and pillaging and killing their own people. And so we've actually culturally, evolutionarily developed the ability to stay up for about 3 nights. At 3 nights, you feel like garbage, and you will probably fall asleep for most people. Not everyone, but most people. And it's funny because some of these same people who are having these freakouts that I share this with, they will fully admit, like, oh yeah, in college I would pull all-nighters. And it's like, well, how do you think you did that if we're not built to do it? We have the capacity to do it. It's just maybe it's not that fun, but we really do. So for some of my clients, A, reading the chapter, B, hearing it, and then practicing what is called self-distant talking from a great book called Chatter. So if you have issues with ruminating thoughts and overthinking, Chatter's a great book. And basically what you're doing is you're using your name in your self-talk. So instead of Luke in the morning at 2 being like, it's okay, you were designed this way. No, actually, there's some weird psychological thing that happens if you go, Luke, you're perfectly fine. You will perform unnoticeably fine today at work. It might not feel great, but no one will have a clue. there's some weird trigger that when you use the word Luke to yourself, that like sends it through a different network and becomes much more effective. So I find when people really absolve that in those first moments of panic at 2 or 3 in the morning that they're not sleeping, and then again, that normal like next thought, something's wrong, next thought, it must be me, we cut it off at the head by starting to use self-distance talk to go, Nick, man, you were designed to be able to stay up for all of tomorrow, maybe even the next day after that. Relax. And pretty soon that becomes what the normal thought process is, to the point where when they have those fleeting moments of anxiety, it's quelled pretty quickly with the like, oh, yeah, why am I freaking out? Like, I can calm down. And what happens when you calm down, Luke? Makes it easier what? Makes
Go to
it,
sleep.
yeah, it makes it a hell of a lot easier to sleep, right?
Yeah.
And all you've done is updated knowledge just to say, hey, this is what sleep knowledge 2.0 looks like. The other thing that it looks like, especially, I wasn't expecting this, but when I started doing one-on-one work, I wasn't expecting to be doing a lot of burnout work. But what happened was, when we get into some of these ancient models that I use, they're so powerful that some of my first beta clients, Luke, that I'd spend like 90 minutes with, a week later, they'd come back and be like, Nick, my God, thank you so much. Like, I can do my full day of work, and then I get home and I'm like present with the kids, and like I'm good at dinner. And I was like, oh, well, that's cool. Like, I was just trying to make sure you slept. Like, that's neat. And it took me a while to realize, like, oh, this methodology that I use can go beyond just repairing sleep. I thought I would be a repairman, but no, it's much more powerful. It can give you a much more sustainable energy day in and day out, that for some of my clients, it means sustainable peak performance where they're at their best on a regular basis, which is super powerful. So, one of the sleep knowledge tools that I point out, and I'll tell the client right to their face, like, I know you're being an idiot right now because of what you just said to me, which is, I'll say, you can work for a maximum of 90 minutes. The research is pretty clear. After that, your brain starts to fatigue its decision-making ability. So I want you to do I actually created it in IT terms because I work with a lot of IT people. But basically, in Indian tradition, it's the yoga position Savasana. The English translation is terrible. It means dead person, or like lying there dead. But what I instruct them to do is lie down on a yoga mat or somewhere comfortable, put on a 10-minute timer, and just let their body fully relax. And then second is let their mind and thoughts wander. And see, before, people thought, up until 1930, everyone thought, if you're not actively, engaged in a conversation like Luke and I are, or Luke's writing a new book about ancient wisdom in modern times, that his brain, when he's not doing it, is off. Turns out, like, that's bogus. In 1930, a psychologist in Germany using an EEG machine accidentally noticed that his test subjects, when they were waiting between tests, their brain waves were still crazy active. So he wrote and published a document on it, and no one did anything with it. Someone in 2021 picked it up for a little bit with an fMRI machine, and you tell me, do you know many people who know this? No, it's
No.
still dead. So we're talking about something that came about in 1930, and what we figured out was your brain is involved in another tier of thinking. It's actually doing what I like to call it, no one else calls it, but I'm a sleep nerd, so I call it daytime REM. Because if you get the description of REM sleep, and folks who are listening who don't know, REM sleep is like the mental restorative half of your deep sleep cycle. And what it does is does a lot of things like organize all the information that you've been taking in, sorting it by topic. It's like a sorter. It's like a totally free sorter. But the other thing it does is it allows different ideas to come together. So a lot of people, this is what people will call the shower situation. Yeah, I had this great idea when I was in the shower. Well, it's because they're accidentally entering what is called default mode. It's called the default mode that's turned on. And it's an actual, more what I would call an advanced level of thinking. And I always tell people get a notepad next to you because you're going to get 2 or 3 ideas during that 10 minutes. So that's just another example of sort of the sleep knowledge 2.0. And I'm running a list of those, and at some point we'll release it. But just that there's a lot of misunderstandings and sort of old world. And I use that one to be like, we're not talking even super old world. We're talking like 1930. Someone actually was like approved in the scientific community to be like, I have verified this to be true. So for some people, I'm like, hey, if you're not getting a lot of REM sleep, and we figure that out early on, what do? Well, we customize their plan to factor in more of these moments where they're getting into the default mode network. And for folks who are like, cool, I'm going to try that. 2 things real quick. One is don't bring your cell phone. One of my first clients I tested this on, he was so happy that when we had our first week check-in, he did terrible with his sleep program, and he just kept smiling about these, passive rest sessions that he was getting, and he wouldn't stop smiling on the video chat. And I'm like, dude, I get it. It worked. It went well. But listen, we got to talk about your sleep plan. It's not going well. The next week I talked to him. He's like, Nick, I got to tell you, I took my cell phone with me, and was like, and like had it in front of me and was doing stuff during the 10-minute restoration period. He's like, and it didn't work at all. And I have to dig it up, but there is some information about when you engage with the cell phone or anything really, you're immediately flipping out of that default mode. It turns off like that, and you're back into sort of activated, my brain needs to record this information. So that's just a little bit about Sleep Knowledge 2.0.
We'll get back talking to Nick in just one moment and continuing our conversation on sleep. But before we do so, I would just like to take a quick pause and break to mention real superfoods. As I've shared many times on the podcast, Real Superfoods are on a mission to make superfoods more convenient and accessible to everyone. Continuing with the theme of this podcast episode today of sleep, one product that I utilize and have been utilizing for a few years now before sleep as part of my wind down routine is a nice cup of hot chocolate without the added sugars and nasties. I do not use your standard hot chocolate that you would find on the shelf. Instead, I go straight to the best stuff, and Real Superfoods sell the best stuff. Their Cocoa Dream product is the perfect alternative to your standard hot chocolate, which is usually full with sugars and other nasties, as I mentioned beforehand. It's combined with reishi mushroom and ashwagandha to help promote sleep, de-stress, and wind down. Is 100% organic, and has less than 1.5 grams of sugar. And the sugar that it does have isn't your refined sugar that you would find in the standard brands. It's easy to enjoy with a little hot water or milk, whatever takes your fancy. And as we've discussed beforehand on the podcast, the quality of the cacao that we drink matters, and Real Superfoods only utilizes the highest quality cacao from the best sources. It's ultimately the perfect way to switch off and wind down at the end of a long day. To try their Cocoa Dream product or any other product that they offer, all you need to do is head to the link in the show note description and enter code RC20, that's RC20 for 20% off your first order. Now, let's get back to today's episode with Nick Stewart and continue the discussion on sleep. That's fascinating. In order to get, I guess, a bit more practical, and I was thinking maybe like to integrate some of the ancient wisdom techniques that you utilize as well, kind of within this. Within the question I'm kind of gonna ask next is that some people, I'm sure we've all had a bad night's sleep, right? And so for a lot of people, I've kind of experienced this myself, that when we have that bad night's sleep, we then are maybe conscious of the fact, like, will that bad night's sleep go into like the second bad night's sleep and so on and so on. And now we're kind of in that rut and in that habit. So one question I wanted to ask you is like, when somebody does have that bad night's sleep for whatever reason, maybe stresses in their life, whatever it is, what's your like number one recommendation that they do or don't do the following day? And then maybe that can also lead us into some of the ancient wisdom kind of practices that you recommend and giving us like the 101, like the very kind of basic kind of understanding of them so people can understand them and start to practice them. But a little bit of a loaded question there. But yeah, I was really, really wanting to ask you in terms of like when people do have that bad night sleep, because I
Yeah.
think a lot of people can relate to that
Yeah.
like more. What do you recommend they do like the next day?
Great question. I think there's a pre-answer to that question, Luke, which is I sometimes forget that that's a reality. So like I have to like sometimes remind someone. So one of my clients just now from Bangladesh, all he needed was like 1 or 2 sessions and he just started sleeping and everything was good. When he messaged back to me one time, I was like he was still just so excited, wanted to help me with all these other things as return favor. And I said, hey man, I just got to remind you, this will not be 100% of the time. Like I've never had someone where it's like, yes, it's perfect every night. There's some guy I guess online who does, but it's like it's again, maybe we could fit that into sleep knowledge 2.0. 100% of your life isn't going to be well slept, even if you are doing all of the right things. Something will happen. Sometimes you understand it, sometimes you don't. It's a reality. So, number one is just developing that sense of acceptance. And then for my personal clients, it's just having the faith. And then we can integrate into some of these models I've talked about that the not prescription, but the model or the sort of plan, that the plan itself will erode those things over time. So all I need to do is the same thing I did yesterday. And I think that's the most boring thing for people to realize, and it's something I still need to do work on, is your brain just loves things to stay the same. It just like will go out of its way to just try to keep things the same. And I always use this horrible example, but people get it, which is very early on when you're young, maybe you're in college, and you find out you take a sociology class and you find out, oh my God, there's all these women who are being abused by their partners, like physically being beaten up regularly. Why don't they just leave? And it's like, because the brain is so wired that it is comfortable with things exactly how they are, that yes, they will prefer a few beatings a week over the fear of unknown of leaving, which sounds crazy, but it's like that's just how powerful the brain is. For next day recovery, like I said, is really to live from that sense of like, I could do this for 2 more days, to have that level of confidence in yourself. And then I would say that you're making sure you're maximizing any of the rest and restoration techniques that client and I have done. You're either double downing and making sure, like for example, this morning, because I knew I was coming out of a rest and restoration period, I jumped in the sauna for 15 minutes. I don't usually do that, but it was just like, how do I just kind of like ease my way back in and also just make sure everything is capped off? So I'd say that's for one. But in a way, Luke, my answer is more about what not to do, which is don't freak out. Don't feel like you have to double down on your melatonin supplement at night. Don't even try going to bed earlier unless it's like 15 minutes or you just like can't stay awake. Then whip yourself to bed and go to sleep. I've had clients who are like, yeah, like, like, and I just was so tired, but and I was like, good, go to bed then. This is wonderful. Like, you should go to bed. But always, with everyone that I work with, it's always about making sure you have some of those rest and restoration periods throughout the day. So for your average person, they're not getting that. But let's say, I just got a text this morning from a guy I'm working on a new book with. It's pretty cool. And he was just like, I didn't sleep on Saturday night, and I was like at McDonald's, the drive-through, and I don't know why, but he's worked with me long enough that like I could tell by the message that there was nothing in his message that was like, so what should I do to counter it? It was just like, hey Nick, guess what? I had one of those nights you told me about. It happened. And instead of fighting it and forcing myself in the bed, I just went with it. I ended up doing work and getting things done.
It sounds like it's about like instead of worrying about it, and getting yourself into that perpetual loop, as you said, the brain likes repetition. So let's just say, so you use myself example, like I have like a wind down routine. So let's say last night I had a bad night sleep, right? It would be tonight just continuing with my wind down routine, like don't change anything, unless, as you're saying, like I'm really like haggard, and I'm like, you know, here on the podcast, falling asleep is like, then get to bed type of thing, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it just sounds like actually just don't change anything, because would it be right to say that our bodies would just kind of adapt? And yeah, it sounds like the worry about it is actually more of the detrimental thing than potentially just having the bad night of sleep.
Yeah, think about the things that could trigger, right? Like I have very few rules for clients, but one of them that I share up openly is no suffering in bed. And they're like, what do you mean? And I'm like, and then I'll paint that picture of like, let me guess, especially if they have insomnia. I'm like, it's 2 a.m. Now you're panicking. We go through that scenario and they're like, yeah, that's exactly like me. And I'm like, get out of the bed immediately. Out. Gone. Find the most restful spot on that couch in the living room with a nice dim light in your favorite fiction book or a cup of tea, whatever, and just figure out how to be in as happy, it would be a stretch, but is in well-being space as possible. And when you feel, like you said, that urge to like maybe I could go to sleep, then return to the bedroom. Then do that. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. One is what I'm doing with them is taking apart that brain association with my bedroom as a place that I suffer in. I've tried this with anyone who tells me like, "Oh, yeah, I've had insomnia for 10 years." I'll tell them this and I'm like, "Here, let me tell you, yes. How many times have you walked by your bedroom during the day, looked in there for a second, and your immediate thought was, that's the place that I suffer?" And they're like, "Yeah, I do." I'm like, I know. And we're going to end that. And one way to end that is to pull that apart. So again, with my clients, it's like right from the start, how do we get away from the example that you gave, which is what happens if you don't sleep for a night? It's like, that's number one. Number two is again that mindset of like, oh, I'm built for this. Like I can do this. I would even want my clients to have a little edge of confidence of like, I'm gonna be able to go to work and perform at my standard level, and I'm gonna come home and I'll go to sleep, and there's no like one day because I didn't sleep effect that hurts the next. No, they're fine. There's nothing wrong. And then the idea of also not changing things is not being too dramatic with the changes. So, for example, we said you have your nighttime routine. So, like Luke's nighttime routine is that he starts at around 9:15 and he's in bed at 10 p.m. Well, he didn't sleep the night before. So now he's like, no, I got to get to bed at 9:30. So I'm going to start my whole thing before that. The chances of that working are so low. So then what happens? Now you've slated yourself in bed as your solution to the day of lost sleep, and now you've once again triggered yourself to be anxious. Now you're upset. It's not working. So I had like once one client who I had pitched like a year ago about it, and he basically was like, "Yeah, I don't know," and kind of like disappeared. And then a year later, he had gotten tested for sleep apnea, came back to me and was like, "Okay, I'm ready to do it." Well, in that call, he's like, I'm gonna start going to bed an hour and a half earlier. And I was like, no! I was like, do not do that. I was like, 15 minutes. That's it. I'm like, that's max. I was like, and when in a couple weeks, when you can tell me that you and your wife are like, hey Nick, guess what? Like 5 out of the 7 nights, we're falling asleep 15 minutes earlier. Cool. Now leverage in another 15 minutes. But to do those drastic responses, Luke, the next day, to your point, which was a great point, is it kind of triggers off these sort of upset, irritated states, which all lead to worse sleep. So the chances, if you really responded terribly to one last lost night of sleep the next day, you just bumped up the chances of you having a second bad night of sleep.
No.
Great question, by the way. Let's get
Tell
ancient.
me, yeah. So give us like the 101, like basic kind of description of some of the ancient tools that you use, and like maybe like one practical example where or how people could use it in the time that we have left.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do a fast version and you can pluck in on them and go, can you tell me more about that? One is that I use a sort of evaluation slash planning initial model that is literally 4,000 years old. And it comes from Hinduism, and it comes from a deity goddess who was the first goddess that existed called Durga, Durga. If we have time, I'll tell you her story because it's awesome. But the thing with Durga is, and you might have seen it even if you're a casual person, it's the image of this goddess female with all the arms. Have you seen it? Oh, you've not seen this. You have to
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
her sword broke, but I have her kind of all over the place in the house. But here's an image of Durga, and
Okay,
as you can
maybe.
see, she
The
had a
name kind of sounds familiar.
she had a sword here, and there's another weapon I can't remember her name, and then there's all these various weapons. And the interesting thing about Durga is that Durga really became a model for me to expand what I was working on because of this simple fact. Don't come to the fight with one weapon. And I think this is one of the things that separates me from most coaches. They're like, I was trained in CBTI, which is the standard insomnia treatment. So they'll just give Luke that one thing. With the process of using Durga's sort of symbolic process, we're arming you to the point of ridiculousness. Like, she's even showing up, she's got 8 weapons minimum and comes in with a lion on top of it. Like, she really needed a lion. So the question for her was, do I have any doubt this is going to work? No. Like, I am going to win this battle. Whatever it is, it's just a matter of how much time. Because we've loaded the deck. We've brought grenades, bazookas, swords, machetes, talons, nunchucks. We've brought it all and layered it into a plan for you. So as long as you stay consistent with the plan, your likelihood is that the weight, just the sheer weight of it, is going to resolve the issue. And so sometimes people are surprised that I'm like, oh no, I don't use like the Pittsburgh Sleep Index or many of the modern sort of evaluation things when I work with someone. No, like in sort of adapting her symbolically, it's agreed upon that the first thing is to understand, I wrote this down for this, and adapt to the nature of the challenge. So when I get a new client, that's literally what I'm doing. I'm understanding them, understanding how I would have to adapt and they would have to adapt to the nature of the challenge. And then the other aspects of her symbolically are harnessing collective strengths and resources. So, what are the strengths I bring and the client brings? Strategic use of resources and relevant products. Yes, there are certain products that are great for a client. I had a client who just recently had a breakthrough because of a product. Like, Luke, CBTI is the only I guess what would we say, approved insomnia treatment from the Medical Sleep Foundation of America or whatever that exists. It has nothing about environmental products and your environment in helping to resolve insomnia. We might end our program together with this guy short simply because we got him a memory foam mattress top that was 3 inches thick with a pillow top on it. And he messaged me that night and was like, how do I put this on the bed? So I told him how to do it. And then I checked in the next morning. I'm like, how'd it go? And he's like, I literally passed out with my hand, like the phone was in my hand and I could tell that my arm had physically never moved. Like it had just stayed there. So for him, just having that aspect, again, another weapon, right? So in my model, it's like we want to arm you mentally. That could be sleep knowledge 2.0. That could extra activity. What are the activities? We'll go over some of those. And then what is the environment and the products? Do you have your computer set up in your room? You probably want to get it out if you have insomnia. What are the environmental aspects? And then the power of timing and execution. So I say that's the last thing that Durga gives you is
Mm.
when do we do these things? When is the timing and how do we do them? And when I collapse all those together, you really have a powerful, powerful method for helping. I just learned this. There's over 80 different sleep disorders. Will it cover all of them? No. But I bet you it will cover a lot more than here's some antidepressants and here's some Ambien, which is what our doctors do here in the West. I think if I had to pick one, without a doubt, and there's so much information out there, so this would be easy for people to go and learn and they don't need me, is mindfulness meditation. I started joining temples when I was like 16 years old. Had no idea someday this would come back to positively haunt me, but it's got 6 incredible impacts on your sleep. So if you are sick of hearing the word mindfulness, I totally get it. But even in my book, I basically stripped it of all the academic knowledge, like speak. But in that one section, I actually highlight 3 different studies where people were just meditating for 15 minutes a day and they're testing them months down the line, and their sleep was better and had decreases in suicidal ideation. So I would say, other than sleep itself, Luke, the next best trick that's out there, I can't find one that will codify and improve your deep sleep for your body and hit you with restoration of the mental REM restoration sleep. Mindfulness meditation has proven again and again to do that. And that's 2,500, 2,600 years old. Yeah.
Well, Nick, thank you for your time today. It's been fascinating to learn about your work, sleep fitness, sleep knowledge 2.0. We'd definitely love to invite you back onto the show and dive deeper into a lot of the ancient wisdom behind your work. I feel like we've only scratched the surface in the time we've had today, but thank you for sharing what you have. Where do people go if they want to get the book, learn more about what you do?
Yeah, a few places. I think kind of like the interactive central hub is probably on LinkedIn. Just put my name in, Nicholas Stewart. But you can also go to their standard www.sleepfitnesscoach.com. That will get you tied in. And I think the book is on Amazon. I would just let people know that probably this week I'm going to slash the price on it, because based on a year of great feedback from people like you, Luke, and some clients, I was like, oh, we can trim and clean and have this redesigned and make it even a better product for people. So hopefully that will get released before Christmas time or at the beginning of January. But if you're dying for a copy, the version of it as it is right now, still great. You'll notice the reviews are it's like 4.9 or something on Amazon, and you can pick it up there as an ebook, hard copy, or a paperback.
Amazing. I will link that all down below with your
Thanks.
socials and
Thank you.
yeah, where people continue in touch. But no, Nick, I would definitely love to continue working together, well, collaborating in this way and bring you back on to explore more of the ancient wisdom side. But I feel like today we've given people the first look behind the curtain, I guess, into sleep knowledge 2.0 and sleep fitness, which will help them on their journey with sleep and help them to improve this area of their life. So thank you for all your wisdom today. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, Luke, it was a super pleasure, and yeah, I agree. We got to hit the art of war that I need to bring in. That's another 2,500-year-old one that I now use with clients, and yeah, we have more to discuss for sure. And I appreciate the platform to get to talk about it.
Excellent. Thank you, Nick.
All right, see you soon.
I hope that you've enjoyed my conversation today with Nick Stewart, as we've been discussing what Sleep Knowledge 2.0 is, what the term sleep fitness actually means, what to do after a bad night's sleep, and so much more. We also started to explore some of the ancient wisdom behind Nick's methodologies when it does come to sleep and how he helps his clients. I would love to know what you've taken away from this episode and what positive changes you're going to make in your life as a result. Do leave a comment whether you're watching on YouTube, listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you get your podcasts from. I read every comment and review and appreciate you being here and tuning into the show. I look forward to sharing the next episode of the podcast with you really soon. See you then.